Hey everyone, and welcome back to another World of Warcraft Legion video. Today we're going to be covering the Legion Summit. This was a big press event that Blizzard did where they essentially did one or two small announcements and a whole bunch of interviews. Through that we have some extremely interesting information about the Legion patch cycle that I'm pretty sure most of you will be quite pleased to hear. So let's just get right into it. We're going to start off with the patch cycle because I think that's basically the most interesting thing here. So they plan to really shake things up with the patch cycle of Legion, at least in comparison to Warlords of Draenor. So they want to have 3 raid tiers, with the first tier being the launch tier. That is actually going to consist of 2 actual raids. So there's the Emerald Nightmare one and the Suramar one. Then the second raid tier is going to be patch 7.2, and they want to do a third raid tier after that. Now, they currently have solid plans for 3 patches. That would be probably, I'm assuming 7.1, 7.2, and 7.3, and they are saying that the 7.1 patch should hit the PTR quite soon after Legion launches. Overall, they said they want the patch cadence to be more similar to Mists of Pandaria, where we, despite a really long wait at the end, had a lot of patch content. They also said they were happy enough doing patches of different sizes. Now, I think that's something that's really good. You had patches like 5.1 and 5.3, which were smaller, but they went in there and they gave you some content, which I think is definitely quite good. They also mentioned that throughout all of these patches coming out, they plan to roll out more dungeons into the game, and indeed patch 7.1 is set to have a dungeon in it. So it seems like more patches, more content overall, more dungeons, and 3 raid tiers, which is great for a number of reasons that I've already talked to death. Basically, they said that Warlords of Draenor was a bit of a problem because the wait between BRF and HFC was too long, while the wait between Highmaul and BRF was a bit too short, given how Highmaul and Blackrock Foundry were technically supposed to be the same tier. Well, they were of the same tier. Anyway, given Legion's release date, I think that makes sense because we ended up having 14 months of Hellfire Citadel. They said that at the time they thought Legion would be done far faster than it was, but well, come on, it's software. That stuff's never on time. Also, they apparently said that we won't be seeing much of Illidan until a later content patch, but eventually he will be a key character to the story. So this is maybe one of the single best bits of news with, in regards to Legion as far as I'm concerned. If you look at Warlords of Draenor, there are many design decisions that I really don't like, and they're all well documented on the channel, and the same goes for quite a lot of other people who have been making content on the internet. But I think that if Legion had have had more of that content, or not Legion, Warlords, if it had have had more of that content, it would have been in a significantly better place than it is now. The reality of the situation is that for a lot of players, they played Warlords of Draenor for a month, maybe 2 or 3 months, and found that they really didn't have much else to do, and then they hopped into Tanaan, and within a very short space of time, found that actually it was just back to redoing the dungeons they already knew, and, doing this new and pretty awesome raid, but that the actual content of the Tanaan jungle itself was really kind of dry and stale. If there had have just been more content, I think Warlords would have went down a lot better and would have been more successful in retaining players. It seems like they want to have more content and have a more consistent patch cycle with Legion, and I think that will be quite good for retaining players. Do bear in mind that there is a period in Mists of Pandaria's launch where it actually gained a few 100,000 players and managed to stay at pretty much the same number of subscribers for a considerable duration of time, which I think is a testament to how well a well-managed patch cycle can retain players. Next, let's talk about Harbingers. This is an animated series that's similar to Lords of War. Seems like it's primarily surrounding the Illidari. They've released the first episode to the people who are at the Legion Summit. It's not out for us though, so we'll have to wait and see. But I really like Lords of War. Hopefully Harbingers is good, so that's definitely quite nice to see. Let's move on to visual updates. So one of the questions I always get on the channel is about a new engine for World of Warcraft. Somebody asked the Blizzard team that, and basically they said that WoW's art style wouldn't really benefit from a new engine that much anyway. And yeah, that is the case. Look at WoW's art style. Do you need look at the Unity Adam demo, especially the second part that came out recently. You'll find in the Unity Technologies YouTube channel. Like, do you need the lighting techniques, etc., that are in that when your art style looks like World of Warcraft's? I would argue not really, and making that new engine would involve a lot of engineering time, throwing away a lot of work, so is it really worth it when you could just keep on incrementally making your current engine a bit better? I think for now it makes sense just to keep the engine as it is and work on it. Now, they also said that models for Worgen and Goblin aren't really that high on the priority list. I understand why, though. I think it's a little bit of a pity with the Worgen. I don't like their model that much. I especially dislike the female Worgen model. It just kind of, I don't know, there's something really odd about it. It kind of looks like a dog human, not this... It looks like a dog human rather than looking like a big ferocious werewolf. For whatever reason. Now, they also said that they upgraded the melee animations and caster spell effects in Legion, and that it's likely they'll look at caster animations in the future. The melee animations were chosen because they were a very glaring problem, so that's what they decided to work up first. And they also mentioned, as far as visual updates goes, that they are stepping up their game with armor, allowing for more asymmetry, and then custom 3D shapes and more elements of the armor. All of this adds to... it gets, it sort of gets rid of that feeling where the armor is a bit like a painted texture on your character's skin. I think that's definitely a good thing. And they also mentioned that they have rolled some of the ideas of the class accessories blog that was pre-Warlords of Draenor into the Legion stuff, like paladins having labrums, hunters having quivers, but they could work more of that into stuff in the future. Next up, let's talk about legendary items. So, legendary items will be usable in all Legion content, though, as we've already covered, this doesn't really affect PvP content bar in the world. Now, the first tier of Legion raid content is balanced around most people not having a legendary, but future tiers will be balanced around most people having a legendary. Now, as far as the acquisition for those legendaries goes, well, they said they will have bad luck protection and that it will be almost impossible to get a duplicate, which I think is pretty good. And they also talked about the idea of breaking down a legendary in order to craft another one. And when I say that, I mean internally they've talked about that, but no solid plans. Who knows if that'll be a thing? As far as sources go, they said that they will be coming from dungeon bosses, raid bosses, and world quest caches, but in the future they might actually expand where you can get them from. Again, though, that will all just come into the patch cycle. They also are likely to add legendary quality relics for your artifact weapon. These would augment it in more ways than the current epic ones do, so I'm assuming that as well as increasing a trait by a few points, giving you some item levels, it might have its own unique effect. Though it doesn't seem like this is going to be some sort of launch feature, and indeed it doesn't make much sense to be a launch feature. That sounds like more something for a final patch. Next, let's quickly touch on world content. So they said that the world quests might be expanded to other parts of the game, but in Legion, the focus for them is in the Broken Isles. And they said they would like to add them in future expansions, so hopefully it's a system that works out quite well. Now, as for Legion and gearing, with these world quests, the item level of the gear starts off at 805, and it can Warforge up, and it will somewhat also increase based on your own item level, but they're not 100% sure until where. Currently, they're thinking that it will be good up to Mythic Dungeon Standard, but they're not really sure beyond that. With that covered, let's talk about dungeons. So, they plan to release dungeons throughout the patch cycle. I'm so happy to hear about that. Like, even in Warlords of Draenor, with the Mythic Dungeons, they implemented a system that made that dungeon content a lot more relevant, and then just forgot to add the dungeons that really needed to be a part of that system, right? To make that system something that's, I think, exciting. As much as it is a system that I do believe does drive quite a bit of gameplay, it would have been very nice if that came with some new dungeons. Also, patch 7.1 is set to have what they are calling a mega dungeon. I don't know what that means. They did say that it will require some sort of attunement, but a part of me is thinking a little bit more closely to something like old-style BRD. Who knows, but certainly an exciting prospect. Now, they also talked about dungeon gear, so Mythic dungeon gear is to cap at 5 levels, that's Mythic plus dungeon gear, by the way, from bosses, is going to cap at 5 levels above heroic raid content, as far as in where Warforge is up to, but gear from the weekly cache that you get through your Mythic plus keystone, that's that sort of Diablo reminiscent system, that gear can scale up to a Mythic raid level. So that's pretty cool. However, you still will want to do the raid content, because that'll give you access to specific trinkets and things like that will have a effect on your DPS that certainly extends past the raw statistics that are actually on them. Now, as far as statistics goes, it's worth mentioning that they actually wanted to do a stat squish for Legion, but didn't have time, and they said the next expansion is planned to have one. Look, I think that they are increasing player power too much from tier to tier. I think that creates a number of problems in regards to catch-up, tiers superseding each other, and this apparent, need for a stat squish every expansion if they were planning one for Legion. The Legion numbers are massive. They'll be way bigger than Mists of Pandaria's numbers. They did say that, of course, the expansion after Legion will have a stat squish. I would say rather than have a stat squish every expansion or every other expansion, just, reduce the need for them by having more sane and paced gearing. Now, they did say that they don't think the rate of increase of player power is a problem. In one of the interviews, I would personally disagree with that. I think it creates gameplay and social reasons. That's a bit of a pain in the ass and makes the game a bit harder to come back to for players returning mid-expansion without Blizzard going and putting in a million catch-up mechanics. But then I feel that those catch-up mechanics somewhat cheapen the content that dedicated players are actually doing. So, it's a whole big topic. But yeah, there's my thoughts on stats and their stat squish plans. Next, professions. First of all, and this is quite important to me, their equivalent of Savage Blood is bind on pickup. Boo. No, I don't want this, so I'm not particularly pleased about that, unfortunately. I did not like how the Motes of Harmony during Mists of Pandaria were bind on pickup. I thought that really did hurt the economy a lot. For some people, they enjoy all the crafting stuff. And for other people, they enjoy farming items and mobs and then being able to sell that on to other players. But it's a pity that won't be facilitated here. Now, onto the good news with profession content. They see it as being something that will be parallel to other bits of content and an area of the game that will receive constant updates in the Legion patch cycle. That's absolutely great to hear, and it's nice that they're treating professions as more of another way of playing World of Warcraft rather than a side activity to what you might otherwise be doing. That's definitely good. And they also confirmed that the profession content is not going to be time-gated like it was in Warlords of Draenor. Basically, they said in Warlords they tried to do it so that it could be, accessible, so that it wouldn't create loads of pressure for people, but what they found is that people actually just wanted to spend loads of time on professions, but because everyone had access to so much stuff, it was very hard to sell things and create an interesting economy, so it seems like that's something that they want to be avoiding in Legion, which is good. They absolutely should be avoiding that. It was a bit shit. Next, social features. So they plan to have a new set of social features for Legion's launch, but the team are not really happy with where they are at the minute, and they're planning to push those back to a patch. I know that includes some sort of social queuing system, not exactly sure what that's going to be like, but they have plans there, and World of Warcraft has been upgraded to the Battle.net infrastructure that Diablo and Overwatch use, so they will be able, they've got that framework that will allow them to add better social features as time goes on. And that's pretty much it insofar as the stuff that I want to cover. There are some more kind of, small details, right? There's a shotgun blast of small details. But here I thought, let's talk about the big topics. Let's talk about the stuff that really does matter. A lot of the stuff was talking about, beta balancing, but that's not that interesting in a video like this. I think what we really want to be focusing on is the big picture of how the game's actually going to be, where it is now, where it's going, what their big plans are, and I really did want to highlight that patch cycle news to everyone watching the channel, because that was one of my biggest criticisms of Warlords of Draenor, and this does seem like a very firm commitment not to repeat that issue, which is certainly something that has me extremely pleased. Anyway, that is it for this video. Let me know what you thought on Twitter or down in the comments. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.